if you asked me what is the absolute best vegan meat I've ever had, it for sure would be this ham. Now, I made a recipe video about this ham a few years ago, but since then I've made it a lot, tweaked and simplified the recipe and ingredients, and gotten better at the techniques involved. So I thought it was time for another visit to this absolutely ham-azing recipe so I can share what I learned and changed. The full visual guide and recipe is of course linked in the description. Now enough of a setup, let's get to the meat of the video. To make this, we're gonna make 2 doughs, wash out the starch leaving only the protein, add seasonings and fat, cook, optionally glaze, and serve. So first things first, we're gonna make 2 separate dough balls in 2 separate bowls, but I'm just gonna show you one. Dump 1 bag in each bowl. I find brand name all-purpose tastes the best, but use what you like. Add 1/8 teaspoon of dye to the water, then add it to the flour. Now, one of the common questions I get is about not wanting to use red dye. Now, look, it's for aesthetics alone. You don't need to use it, but if you don't, it'll just be white. And no, beetroot powder will not work. It will turn your roast gray. If someone finds a better solution, please let me know, but in the meantime, no subs, sorry. Now mix it into a shaggy dough. I like to spray my hand down with oil before doing this just to avoid getting that dough glove. So in about 2 to 5 minutes of mixing, you'll get a shaggy dough with some flour left on the bottom. Repeat all this again, except you use 1/4 teaspoon of red dye this time to create different colored doughs, or don't, it's up to you. Cover with water and let them rest for at least 1 hour. After the rest in this step, we'll be massaging or washing the starch out of the flour, leaving only the red gluten behind. You will do this over the course of 5 to 6 washes, and it will take a total of about 15 minutes for each dough. If you want a full-on deep dive on how to wash the flour, I have a whole video about that linked in the description, so I won't cover it in depth here. But in short, you want the dough to be washed until there are only small bits of starch left. Let them rest together for at least another 30 minutes or up to 24 hours if you feel like taking a break. While that rests, let's make up our seasoning mix. For those who have made this before, I removed the MSG and did not use smoked salt. You can still do those things, but I've found it isn't completely needed, and I like to keep my recipes as accessible as possible. After the rest, the dough should be smooth, dry, and sticky at this point and have little marks of starch still left. Now we're going to simultaneously season while tearing to create that legendary wonderful texture. It's the texture that makes this so good. So we're going to season, tear, fold, and repeat. Season your roast with about 1/4 of your mix, rub it in, grab a big ol' honka and tear open your roast, and don't worry, you're not going to hurt it. Seriously, you won't. Get in there and tear away. The more you do, the better. Just try to keep it all somewhat connected. You want to really agitate the dough, causing the gluten to separate, and when they rejoin, they will form imperfect bonds, and it's these imperfect bonds that makes the texture so incredible. Now keep tearing, and when you start to see unseasoned sections of the dough, add more seasoning. By the way, I'm using gloves here as we're working with a bunch of salt, and I didn't want to find out the hard way if I had any microcuts on my hands. Now fold from inside out to find swaths of unseasoned protein. You can tell if it's unseasoned by the color. The lighter the dough, the less seasoned it is. Now season, rub in, and repeat until all of your mix is gone. Another question that popped up on my last vid was if you can use less salt, and that answer is no, and the reason for that is that a lot of salt falls out during the seasoning process. If you use less, you will likely undersalt your roast, and that would be bad. Also, this calls for kosher salt. That's important. Don't use table salt. So tear it up, really tug and pull at all the untouched areas of the dough, stretch and fold the gluten to find all those unseasoned parts you can, and then of course season. So near the end, water will start to seep out of the dough that was trapped in there from the wash. This is a good sign, and it's osmosis in action. Science. Alright guys, so I was editing the video and I noticed it looks a little funky, not gonna lie, on the moisture coming out of the roast, but that's just the water mixing with the salt, mixing with the molasses, giving it that color. It's fine. Everything is fine. It is also happening because we've destroyed enough gluten bonds that water has nowhere to hide. Once you've got your roast all seasoned, start knotting and tucking the strands into the roast to form a ball. And now we add the fat. Now take a stick of butter, which is about a half cup, and put 1 tablespoon portions under your knots. Don't be afraid to unknot them, stick butter in, and knot it back. You can also still tear into the gluten to access places to put hidden butter. The point of all of this is to put the butter so far in the roast that as the gluten reforms back together, it will trap butter into the roast, giving it that juicy flavor. Once your butter stick is kicked and you've tucked in all your strands, let's wrap this up in some cheesecloths. I like these high thread count ones, but others should work too. I actually wasn't happy with this wrap and rewrapped it tighter off camera. Here is a photo of it. Try to form it into a tight cylinder if you can. Now let that rest for at least another 30 or again up to 24 hours in the fridge if you want to take a break for the day or finish later. And while that rests, let's make a brine. So put in some water, soy sauce, and salt into a slow cooker. Submerge your ham and slow cook it for 4 hours. After the cook, it will be firm and not squishy. If it's squishy, it's not done. Cook it some more. Once it's cooked and firm, let it cool to room temp and enjoy, or use a glaze like I did here. Now rapid fire common questions from the comments I didn't get to answer in my last video. Can you just use Vital Wheat gluten so you don't have to do wash the flour? And the answer is no. It's a completely different technique than wash the flour, and you can't use Vital Wheat gluten. It can't work. Can you do half the recipe? You absolutely can. Just do 1 dough ball and have everything else from there, and you'll have half the recipe. Works well. Now, how much does this make? It'll make about 30 to 60 slices depending on, how thin or thick you slice them. How long does this store in the fridge, and does it freeze? It should stay in the fridge for 4 to 5 days, but it freezes like a dream. When I make this, I cut it in half and freeze the rest to make a little future present for myself. This recipe was inspired by Kim's Pig Saver ham recipe, and if you want to see the original version, I've got that linked below. And I also know a bunch of my subscribers have made this, so sound off in the comments with anything I missed, or if you have any other questions I didn't answer here this time. And that is it. Until next time, y'all, be nice to each other and keep cooking.